Hey guys, today's video is all about scary true stories. Everything from attempted kidnappings to 7-foot creepy Santas. Please let me know in the comments if you want more or if you want something different. As a new channel, I am open to trying new things that you may enjoy. Don't forget to subscribe and like so that I know you like these stories. I don't know what possessed me to post this, but here goes. First off, this is a true story. Not a story that's scary because it's labeled as true. This story is about drug addicts and ghosts. So rewind a handful of years back to 14-year-old me and my best friend at the time. We had been goofing off all day outside because it was the summer, and we finally decided to come back into the safety of the air conditioning. We had the kind of dynamic that when you started laughing, it would get progressively worse until your belly was shaking and your lungs were begging for air. This is relevant because while we were enjoying the warm, really bright, sunny afternoon, we heard something that made us instantly go dead silent. As we were laughing in a fit of hysteria, suddenly, a very clear male voice laughed what sounded like behind us. Bear with me here if you don't believe in ghosts, because this is just half of the story. I remember it was so loud, gruff, you don't hear that every day, you know. We turned to each other slowly, eyes wide, then burst out in laughter so hard, I almost tipped backwards in the kitchen chair. It scared us so much that we couldn't contain how funny it was to see each other be scared shitless. For a long time, we told that story of the random giggling ghost we heard, but turned much more grim in my head as I began to realize the full nature of that day. So now fast forward a couple of years. Honestly, this part is what creeps me out about this. It's now about 2022. I'm 16. My mom and my stepdad had noticed that odd things were going on in our boiler room behind our house. For one, we didn't have a lock that properly functioned on the door. So they would go back there to the door sometimes being fully swung open, light on. Over time, they noticed things being moved around, trash being left in the room, and at times even needles. We discovered that before our stay there, it was a major drug house. I'm sure you've already began to paint a picture of what went on that day when my friend and I were goofing off. If not, I'll paint the map. In the kitchen where we sat, we heard the disembodied voice coming from behind us, but it sounded faint enough to be from another room. The boiler room was on the other side of the wall next to the kitchen table. All in all, we quite literally might not have been alone that day, which to me is scarier than it being a ghost. To this day, I have no idea who was in the boiler room listening to us chat about school, boys, anime, and other random nonsense. You could hear absolutely everything from that room, as I've been out there before. Conversations inside sound clear as day. This was followed by a number of instances over the years where I'd be alone in the kitchen late at night between 12 a.m. and 4 a.m. and hear scuffles coming from seemingly nowhere. Just movement, like someone moving around or moving things around. There is a chance it could have been paranormal, but I kind of doubt it. The laugh was so loud it literally just sounded like a man in the other room. I laugh about this now, I always kind of have, but for dramatic effect. But now I realize how dangerous this situation was. We were completely alone that day with some random, maybe even violent person in the other room. A complete stranger. The boiler room man. Oh. Anyways, keep your doors locked, guys. I'll try to keep this as short as I can, but one day after I picked up my, at the time, 4-year-old daughter from school, I took her to a McDonald's. She loves it, of course, and it was nice to once a week not have to cook her anything at home. Anyways, the McDonald's we went to is a pretty busy one in a nice area. It's on the corner of a major city street. It was after school hours, so between traffic from that and the people that were getting off early, there was no shortage of cars on the road. This is in broad daylight too, as it's right after school. We went through the drive-thru. This is important. So the McDonald's is busy enough to have you pull up past the window you get your food at because they didn't have it ready, but not too busy where you see the long line and say screw that. So I order our food, get to the window, pay, and the worker says please go park in the drive-thru spot and we'll bring your food out to you. Okay, perfect. So I pull in facing forward because it's angled parking. Normally, I'm an exclusive back-in parker because I want a quick exit. I'm just weird like that. Well, the one time I don't back in because it's angled parking, as we're waiting, I see a car pulling off the road and park right next to us. Little weird because it's the drive-thru spot and they didn't order. There were 2 men. The driver, and then the passenger got out and came around to the back passenger seat where my daughter was sitting in her car seat. He tried to open the door a couple of times, but thank God it was locked. He noticed he wasn't getting in and walked back around to his passenger side of the car. By this time, I noticed what happened and turned my seat to face him and hold my arms out like, "What are you doing?" He then mouthed sorry and then got in the car and they drove off. Now, I don't know if he was trying to rob me or kidnap my daughter. I think because he went for the back seat by her, it was meant for a kidnapping. If he wanted to rob me, he would have came to my window. He wasn't armed and she was buckled in, so I don't know, even if he did open the door, what he expects would have happened. I have long arms, and at minimum, I could have reached back and grabbed her legs to cling onto for dear life, and almost use her as leverage to pull myself closer to her and across into the back seat. Of course, in America, we drive on the left side, could have reached with my right hand while using my left hand that is naturally down by the seatbelt to unbuckle, use her as leverage to pull myself into the back seat or her towards me, and she would have almost been a tug-of-war piece. But I don't know what he expected would have happened. I don't know the motives behind it, and the men drove off. It wasn't a van, it was a small compact car, and the driver stayed in the driver's seat. He also pulled and facing forward, so he had to back out and then shift gears to then go forward. So even if he did grab a hold of my daughter, the man would have needed to somehow get her in the car, and then himself in the car and close the door before I could run around to at minimum catch the door from closing. Even to say if he did manage to get her and himself in the car, he had to back out, so I would have had time to get back in my truck and speed off to follow him. I now never ever unlock my doors, even though I've since moved to a very nice area, and this occurred in a pretty decent area. I always have been OCD and a little perfectionist, so I don't really ever keep my gas tank below half. Typically at 3/4, I go top off to keep the payments cheaper, and then I'm just always full, so I would have had plenty of gas to follow him for as long as need be while I call authorities. Crime is not a problem where this took place. Before I even drive, I make sure my doors are locked, and when I'm parked at a standstill, in a drive-thru, etc., I will hit my lock button multiple times to make sure it's locked. Luckily, I had a nice enough vehicle that it automatically locked before being cognizant of making sure they're locked. I now try to make sure I'm always close to full on my gas tank if I ever got in a chase. It's all a little overboard, but after that scary encounter I had, I can never be too prepared. Got a short one for you. It happened when I was about 9 years old. It's Christmas, and a year before I found out that Santa wasn't the one bringing me my presents. I was up and out of my room one night when I saw my dad bringing unwrapped presents through the back door. I wasn't shocked. I was pretty mature for my age. What I didn't do was tell my dad I saw him. Now let's skip to the Christmas after that. Now I know what's going on, but I wanted to be mischievous this Christmas. I waited, acted like I didn't know what was going on, and snuck out to open one of my presents. All I wanted was the PS2. My grades were good. I didn't get into too much trouble, so I knew my parents had to give me that. That's like the main thing I asked for. I peeked out my room, and the house is quiet. Tiptoeing to the front room, I see this massive shadow blocking the light from the Christmas tree. So, okay, I think, well, Dad must be putting more Christmas presents up, as I do have siblings. I peek around a corner, laying on the floor just in case he's looking this way. I peek around and see this guy. Gotta be at least 7 feet tall. His head's almost over the tree. His back is to me, and I can't see his face. I wouldn't have known who it was anyway, because nobody in my family is that tall. Apart from being tall, he was wide, very wide. Again, almost covering the tree. Whoever this was had this long black trench coat on, all black. The coat looked like it was wet, and it was dripping something onto the carpet my parents had down. I, of course, got scared and began to crawl back around that corner. Before I could make it fully around, this guy turns slightly to the side and says, "Only the dead can come back." What the fuck does that mean? Last thing I remember is running back to my room, staying up all night listening, and having an uncomfortable Christmas that morning. It definitely wasn't worth it for a PS2. I still get random nightmares about that. For the background, I'm deaf. I have a hearing aid and cochlear implant. Due to years of speech classes, I can talk and use sign language. Anyway, when I was in 5th grade, me and my grandma moved to a complex house. We lived above while her boyfriend lived below. It was a cute small apartment with 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, and had a window that overlooked the driveway, and there's a door in the kitchen that goes up to the attic. Just a few weeks after we moved in, my grandma had an old radio station on the table in the kitchen, and it doesn't work, but she likes it, so she uses it for decoration. One night, I was woken up by a very loud noise. I have a little bit of hearing left in my left ear, so I could hear it, but couldn't make out what it was. I saw my grandma rushing down the hallway, and so I follow her into the kitchen. The radio's light was on like greenish light, and it sounded like static. She couldn't turn it off and signed to me to unplug it. I checked. It wasn't plugged in. It finally stopped a few minutes later. Around Thanksgiving, me and my grandma went up to the attic to get some Christmas stuff. The attic is small, very narrow, and you could see outside through a little window. I had an uneasy feeling and didn't want to stay up there because I felt like I would be grabbed. There was a door that's completely bolted on the other side of the room. Few days passed, my grandma was at work and wanted me to go up. I was nervous and a bit afraid, but forced myself to go. I went upstairs to the attic and saw the door was not bolted. It was wide open. I had a feeling that someone was looking directly at me, and suddenly there was a loud thud behind the door. I just ran down the stairs and locked the door. It got worse for a week. I was waking up feeling like I was being held down. The footsteps in the hall got louder, and there was banging on the wall. I would joke with my grandma that the ghost knows that I'm deaf. Well, my bed was shaken for a few days, scaring me out of my slumber, and I was losing sleep. The final straw was when I was sleeping. I had a bookshelf with dolls on it just across the room. My bed was shaken, and I suddenly felt something falling on me. 3 of my glass dolls fell on my face. I definitely had a bruise for days from that. My grandma once woken up to the sound of her stepdad calling her by her nickname. Her stepdad died when I was 3, turning 4. So this definitely shook her up because she could even smell the old cologne that he would always use along with the smell of coffee. So to keep you updated, I've shifted to a single room now, currently in college, and just had my breakup. For almost 6 months now, no cases of sleep paralysis or weird dreams or anything mentally disturbing until last night. I had an assignment due for the next day, so naturally I was putting in the late hours. Around 2, done with my assignment, I decided to finally get some rest. I lied down and started scrolling when I saw my ex-boyfriend had called me an hour before. I ignored him and went asleep. At around 3, I heard noise coming from my room. Murmuring sounds like some sort of argument going on. I slowly opened my eyes and saw the white glow from my phone with my boyfriend on the other side, and I precisely remember the time on the call was past 30 minutes. Scared to death, I tried to scream, but in vain. The second time this has happened when I had a call picked up in sleep. Finally, when I gained control over my body, I told him we'll talk tomorrow morning, to which he strangely replied, like I'd be there by tomorrow, and cut the call. Today I called him. He doesn't even remember the call from last night. I checked the logs and he didn't call at all. Not even the 1 a.m. call from last night was in the logs. It's scaring me. Am I going insane? When it was frequent, it felt a lot less, but now after so many months, it's scary as F. This had happened to me about 6 years ago. I was doing my usual routine of walking around town for a few hours as I enjoyed walking, and I was getting my steps in for the day. I'd always start from my house, walk around town for a few hours, then turn around and head back home. I'd always go walking around noon or an hour or 2 later at the latest. My walks would start at 11 a.m. at the earliest or 2 p.m. at the latest. This day in particular, I had a bunch of things to do, so I was unable to go out walking before noon. I'd eventually finished up everything that I needed to do, but it was already in the mid to late afternoon. I checked the time, and it was almost 3 p.m. I debated whether or not if I should go walking, or if I should go tomorrow instead since I had nothing going on the next day. I said fuck it and decided to go for my walk, but I told myself that I had to cut it short since I didn't want to be out after sunset since it would get pretty cold at night. I got dressed and headed out to get my walk in for the day. Fast forward almost 3 hours later, I looked at my phone to check the time, saw that it was almost 6 p.m., and started to make my way back home. I had a bit of a problem, which was I was about 6 miles away from my house, and it would take me about an hour and a half or more to get there. The sun had fully gone down, and there was only a faint orange glow in the sky from it. The night sky had begun to take over, and the air was turning cold. I began to make my way home and had picked up the pace as I didn't want to be outside when it was cold. I was about 2 miles away from my home and thought I was in the clear when I was wrong. I passed by a convenience store when I noticed a man sitting on the side of the building smoking a cigarette. The man looked to be in his early to mid-30s, wore a black hoodie, black pants, and black shoes. I saw him turn his head towards me, and he gave me a blank stare. I thought nothing of it and just ignored it. I turned around a few moments later and saw he had gotten up from his spot and began walking the same direction I was going. I kept checking behind me often to see if he would turn down another street, but he never did. After several minutes of him walking the same way as me, I hear the man start yelling, "Hey." He then started saying other stuff to try to get my attention, which I ignored. Right after that, I heard him yell, "What the fuck," at me in an angry tone. I sped up and didn't dare to look back at that point. I texted my dad and explained that there's some creepy guy following me and how he was yelling at me. My dad replies asking me how far I am, and I say about less than a mile away. He replies back that to keep walking, don't worry, and that he'll come and get me in the next few minutes. I turned behind me to see if he's still following as he stopped yelling, and he was unfortunately. I was 3/4 of a mile away from my house, and I thought about just running there. At the same time, I didn't want this guy to follow me and find out where I lived. I was about to turn down the street I lived at when something told me not to. I texted my dad and told him I passed the street and to go the other way, which he replied with, "Okay." I kept going forward passing the street when all of a sudden I heard some kind of frantic noise. I turned around only to see to my horror that the guy put his hood up and was sprinting straight towards me. Without hesitation, I bolted straight ahead and ran across the street. I kept running for what felt like hours until I saw a pair of headlights coming down the street. I waved my arms like a madman, hoping they would see me. Thankfully, they did and the car stopped. I got closer and saw it was my dad. I looked behind me only to see that the man who was chasing me had somehow disappeared. I got in the car and explained everything to him. He said that he was going to drive down the street to see if he could find the man and would confront him. We drove down the street only to see nobody walking on the sidewalk or hiding behind the bushes. There was no sign of anyone being out as the streets were empty. From that day on, I never go out walking after 2 p.m., and I since then carry a pocket knife with me whenever I go out walking for my own safety and protection. I don't know what that man would have done to me had he caught me, and I don't think I ever want to know. This story isn't about me. It's about my wife. We are from Germany, so I apologize in advance for any typo since I'm not a native writer/speaker. My wife grew up in a small town in the western part of Germany. In her youth, she and her friends used to perform something called Glaserrücken, which could be translated as shoving cups if you like, something that is quite similar to using a Ouija board in the US. It's basically the same thing as a Ouija board, except that there is a small cup in the middle of the table on which everybody in the group places their index finger on top of it. Then there are all of the letters on the alphabet, as well as all numbers 0 to 9, as well as the words yes, no, and goodbye, written on the table around the cup. As I mentioned, my wife used to do this thing. I'm specifically not calling it a game, and she told me she had the most haunting experiences doing it in her teenage years. On one occasion, they were performing it in a friend's house, and after they asked the so-called ghost, the entity that is supposed to move the cup, if it was there, it answered yes. Then the usual questions arose, like if someone would fall in love or if someone was loved by anybody. After that, one of her female friends would ask, "Where are you?" The cup moved, spelling the sentence behind the Eminem poster, Eminem being a popular artist in Germany as well. Then all of the girls would simultaneously turn their heads towards the Eminem poster on the wall, and the moment they stared at it, one pin holding the poster on the wall got loose and dropped on the floor, making one edge of the poster folding into the room, exposing the blank wall behind it. The girls were terrified and immediately quit. On another instance, they were performing Glaserrücken in their Jugendraum in their town. The Jugendraum used to be like a large room often housed inside of a community center or a town hall where teenagers and young adults in their early 20s came together to have fun, flirt, play games, listen to loud music, or drink alcohol, keeping in mind that the legal drinking age for light alcohol like beer and wine is 16 in Germany. There are few of these Jugendraums nowadays since teenagers like to meet up online. Anyway, on that particular night, they were performing Glaserrücken there, and at first, it was also the usual questions about love or school or part-time jobs, teenager stuff like that. But then one of the girls dared to ask the ghost for its name, something you should not do. The cup then moved only to spell Satan, and the moment it reached the end, everything in that room just went pitch black. A complete blackout affecting the entire town. Horrified of this, she and her friends left the building screaming in fear, running down the street, panicking, until they realized that there was one house in that entire town where the electricity hadn't failed. This was the house of my wife's parents. As you see, my stepmother is quite the spiritual type, believing in reincarnation and stuff like that, and she often warned the girls to perform Glaserrücken, as she saw it as a tool to summon demons. After other minor scary experiences that wasn't as spectacular as the ones I just mentioned, she and the girls decided to get to the bottom of things, suspecting that anybody of them was playing a really bad prank. To get this done, they would place the usual letter, numbers, the cup, and so on the table, and started Glaserrücken. This time they agreed that everybody in the group would lift their index finger every 3 seconds off the cup, making sure that none of them were moving the cup intentionally. It lasted for about a minute or so until the cup, from 1 second to another, flew onto the wall, besides them shattering into 1,000 bits. Almost as if it was pulled by a great force, saying, "Don't get fooled. I'm here." Me and my friends recently visited Vegas for our little break we like to take. Wasn't going to be anything too crazy, just some gambling and hookers. I kid, but we wanted to have fun since this would be our first visit there. So at first we did the usual, lost some money, and then more money on knickknacks and food. By our third day there, I was getting a little bored. We'd seen most of the shows and almost everything they had for us to do. The day before our last day, I was on YouTube and saw a documentary-style video on the Vegas sewer system and the people who live there. Basically, Las Vegas has these sewer outlets for rainwater. It's supposed to be there to prevent flooding, but the homeless population have made it their home. I got the bright idea for us to smoke some weed and go exploring. So that same night, I somehow convinced my other 2 friends to go with me. After some back and forth, they say screw it, and we head out. It didn't take too long for us to get to one of those outlets. Shit was covered in graffiti, but you could tell people stay there. Condoms, tampons, used toilet paper. Yeah, all the above. It was empty and dark, but hell if we weren't going to go in there. We walked for a good minute, passing the joint and trying to scare each other. We couldn't see where this thing ended, but decided to trek on. The first thing we came upon was a tent, not too crazy. It had used needles and garbage around it, so we knew other people were down here. We walked further up, and I thought I could see something in the darkness. Something moving, but I ignored it. There are homeless down here. Around this time is when this blood-curdling sound come out of nowhere. It sounded like it came from in front of us, so we all stopped dead in our tracks. My friends look at me, I look at them, and it's like we already know it's time to get the hell out of here. With a little more panic, we started back in the opposite direction we came from. We walked for a good 10 minutes, and then I had this revelation. That tent that we passed should have been passed again by now. I didn't say that, but I clearly remember thinking it. Nobody's really talking much. We even put out the little weed we brought with us. Everybody's just walking fast now, trying not to step on a needle or into someone's dinner. More time goes past, and we still aren't at the end. That's when I gotta speak up. I stop and ask shouldn't we be out already? Right as I was saying the word already, we heard something in front of us again, really close now. That's when we all start running, tripping, fumbling, anything to get out that tunnel. Not even 2 minutes after we started running, we could see the opening. We get to the end, out of breath and confused. Most likely because of the weed. What the hell was that noise is the first question we were asking. Then the next was, did anybody feel someone behind them? None of those questions got answered except that last one. I'm not even sure what we did for the rest of the night. This will just have to live in my memory as something weird that happened. Well guys, that's it for today's stories. I'll be posting twice a week, so please subscribe so you will never miss out.